do some shopping, so sometimes.
Hi, Garrett, you're there?
Yeah, hi everybody.
Oh, great. We're getting lots of people coming in. We're just doing what attracts to this topic or something new about themselves, because we've got a lot of new people today.
Very popular meeting.
It is. It's an important one. It's actually, I'm really excited that it's popular because it's so important. It might be the most important one we've ever done, to be honest. I think that confirmation bias is really the enemy of mankind as a whole. It keeps us stuck and it prevents us from progressing. So it's a really big problem. So I'm glad to see people recognize that. Hopefully they recognize that and they're not here to say confirmation bias is no big deal. Although if they do, I'm going to listen with an open mind. I may end up disagreeing, I'll be honest. So who else wants to share where they're from and what attracted them to the subject? And you're welcome to say that you think confirmation bias is no big deal. I don't want to bias you. So
Hello, my name is Tabby, or also Tabitha. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland. What drew me to this meeting is I want to avoid confirmation bias, and I also want to see it in someone else or like try to prevent it from happening, if that makes sense.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And learning how to overcome it or help other people overcome it is key. Someone has some.
Do you hear that funny noise?
Yeah, Sean, I think that's coming from you. Maybe not. We may have trolls and it may just be a technical glitch, but I'm on a better view to be able to see it now. So Ellis, I did make you a co-host, by the way. So go ahead, Tabitha. I don't know if you finished.
No, I was finished. That was most of it. I personally, I agree. I think confirmation bias is the absolute worst thing in the world, because if you already feel like you're right, you're going to look up things that make you right. And you could definitely be wrong and just look up other articles that are also wrong. So it's funny how people can do that. And then the minute you catch them on it, they're just like, no, you're just not doing the right research.
Right.
No,
You didn't look at my sources. You didn't look at my sources. And they're totally ignoring your sources. I'm in a discussion with someone like that right now about our presentation on the COVID vaccines, who wants to ignore all my sources and say he's got these alternative sources that are more valid than the ones that are publicly scrutinized. So it's an interesting perspective. Who else wants to share their interest in confirmation bias? And where they're from, you know, just a little about yourself. Yeah, Katie, good to see you. If it's the Katie I'm thinking of. Oh, it is.
I guess for me, I'm curious to explore like the idea if someone tries to introduce an idea, but you hadn't come up with it first, how does that relate to conflict? Because that sometimes happens to me, like if someone's trying to plant a thought in there and my brain wasn't ready for it, then I can kind of start to double down on, not always, not like a stubbornness thing, but like the tendency, I want to figure out how that relates to confirmation bias.
Very related. And if I don't answer that by the end of the presentation, ask me about it again, because I have an answer, but I don't want to go into it now. Thanks, Katie. Who else wants to go? Sean, good to see you.
Okay, good to see you. I think everybody is biased, more or less. So one confirmation bias, probably one of it. Of course, everybody like to see something in conforming with their view or their stand. how to overcome confirmation bias probably is something we really need to figure out. So I don't think we can prevent confirmation bias. So maybe open-minded, everybody have to be open-minded to accept somebody else,
Yep.
their view or their position.
That's absolutely part of what I'm going to talk about is having an open mind. And I agree with you, Sean. I don't think we can completely eliminate it, but I think we can drastically reduce it, which is a very good thing to do. Tabitha, you have your hand up again.
Oh, I was just agreeing with Sean because everyone is going to have their biases. And I think what helps me avoid confirmation bias is I automatically assume to myself that, okay, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this person knows something that I don't. I would then ask that person, oh, well, then give me the sources. And then, of course, the person will be like, oh, no, you got to look them up yourself. How can you tell me you know what you're talking about? You have the source. And then admitting that I'm wrong, why won't you just give me that information? That's another thing that I feel like I feel like I'm dealing with people. Like they'll say, this article says this article says that. And then all I'm asking is, okay, well, then show me those articles, show me the sources so I can look it up myself and compare. Nope, you have to look it up yourself. But
We'll
if you
get
already
into
have,
we'll get into the back and forth part of the conversation after the presentation, Tabitha. Right now, we're just doing social. So a quick introduction
Okay.
to everybody and a little bit about what interests them about the topic, if that's okay.
oh, okay.
Anyone else want to share what interests them about the topic of confirmation bias?
My God,
Chelsea.
it's really bad at that.
Yeah, hi. So I wanted to, I'm most interested in confirmation bias and how I can open my mind more and collaborate better with other people. So that's really what brought me to this event today.
Collaboration is a great topic for another day. We're not going to talk necessarily a lot about collaboration. A little bit confirmation bias relates to it, but I think it deserves its own event. So Ellis, maybe take that down for a future event subject. And Will, you want to go next?
Thanks, Garrett. Yeah, it's a really interesting subject, I think, and I'm always interested in, because I do a lot of Zoom meetings, as I guess a lot of people here do, and how often debates break out, often about meaningless things that don't really matter, but will vehemently defend our position.
Yes.
And that really interests me, the way we do that. And I was talking to someone about it, and they said, we're defending our scaffolding, that we have a scaffolding that sort of buttresses our view of the world. And, you know, nobody better dare attack our scaffolding, because our whole world falls apart if our beliefs can be. So that's why I think we do it.
Yeah, it's a worldview. It's an attack of our existing worldview, which can be taken as a personal attack. And we're going to talk about how we should not take it as a personal attack, because that's not what it is. It's an attack on an idea, not the essence of who we are. That said, thank you, Will. Great comments. Jeff, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. I'm interested in this topic because it appears in my everyday work with my group almost every day, and I realize why it happens, that we're all seeking certainty. Certainty gives us strength. And so, you know, the confirmation bias makes us feel more certain and helps us go on with our days and feel stronger about ourselves. And I notice with coworkers, myself, we only have so much energy to go down so many rabbit holes to figure out, to be able to connect dots. So there's, you know, a limit to how many times you can try to get to the root cause of something and understand something.
Yeah, I think certainty is a key part of it. I agree. Thanks for sharing that. Deborah, welcome. Good to see you.
Hi, I'm Deborah. So I've never been to this group before. I'm a member of the Connections Humanist community group, so I know some people here. Hi. Yeah, so like I said, never been to the group before, so I kind of wanted to check it out. I can't actually stay that long. I did like what Will said before, the architectural metaphor. That was cool. Yeah, and then that's interesting what people were talking about in terms of identity. I definitely know people who very much tie their identity to certain viewpoints, so that will be interesting to hear, I guess. Thanks.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do very frequently. And I think that's unfortunate, and that's part of what we're going to talk about. Jennifer, go ahead next.
Hi, I'm Jennifer. I live in central Pennsylvania, and I found this group on Meetup and was interested in the topic in the context of personal growth and also helping others in my
Mom, the dildo's on fire.
Okay.
You'll be okay.
We get trolls every once in a while. The poor people. Think about how sad your life is if that's what you do for fun.
Yeah, imagine joining a meeting just to ridicule it. Like, why even join?
Let's not give them any more attention than they deserve, which is none at all. So,
well, in their defense, some of them are like 19 years old. When you're 19, that sort of thing seems funny to you.
Right.
Looks like a real fire. Maybe the house really caught a fire. I don't know. Hopefully not. Okay.
So, Jennifer, anything more that you wanted to say there?
No, that was it. I think that was a beautiful ending to my statement.
Great. Anyone else want to share their thoughts on confirmation bias and what attracted them to the subject? Don't be shy, anyone.
I got interested in this because in my work, I sometimes do research. I review a lot of like court cases and stuff like that. And witnesses sometimes have this confirmation bias because of, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out why does it occur and how can we prevent it? And it occurs even with my own work. I try to be very objective, but sometimes I get swayed just because I think something should be a certain way, and then I work more in trying to prove that. And you can always prove things by looking at more evidence to support that, support a hypothesis, versus then getting less evidence. So I don't know. Even objectively, I get pulled into confirmation bias, even though I hate it. So anyway, that's what attracted me to this group.
Yeah, thanks. And I normally can't follow the text chat, by the way, for most people. So for Ellie and Will, if you're able to help capture the text chat and bring those to light. But I did notice something that Ellie wrote, another Ellie, which is about confirmation bias in hiring. I would argue it's all the way from court cases to hiring to all aspects of life where people have confirmation bias for or against lots of different aspects of people's lives, and that can play into a lot of injustice, unfortunately. So that said, Alan, did you have anything else you want to say, or should we go on to David?
Go on with David. I'm actually still working, so I have to go back to my work soon. So I'm
No
just
worries.
doing part-time. Thanks.
Looks like you work late too. So if I wasn't hosting, I'd be working. So David Miller.
Well, the way I try to fight against my own tendency towards confirmation bias is to simply not believe anything that's in my head. I mean, how did it get there? How did it get in my head? Who put it there? I mean, have I been silly enough to believe anything I read? Because as we know, not only is it fake news or someone's opinion or outright lies. So that's but of course, as someone pointed out before, most people, in my estimation, can't do it because most people are seeking certainty. Well, the elites of all the belief systems love you certainty seekers, because once you join up with the cause, whatever it might be, the elites use you as their cannon fodder, to put it in extreme terms. And if you need certainty, then you get what you deserve. You need to, embrace uncertainty if you can. And if you can't, well, that's what you are. You're cannon fodder for the various elites of the various belief systems. And that's our human history. Anyway, it's enough from me.
Thank you, David. Susie, you want to go next?
Yes. Hi, Garrett. Good to see you. I'm interested in, of course, in the Free Thinker Institute topic, but this one, I thought that bias is a thing of the past. Like we might have some, but not like across the board. And I am very curious to know, when you say confirmation bias, that means you confirm that it exists. I think if we know where they come from, maybe we can find a way to live not in a biased way.
Agreed. I think if we're more conscious of it, we can reduce the amount of confirmation bias that we engage in and we experience. And with that said, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I guess, Ellis, do you want to do a quick introduction of me, and then I'll introduce the organization?
Okay. Do you want to introduce the topic, or should I say a little bit?
Why don't you introduce me, and then I'll introduce the organization, and I'll go into the presentation, which will introduce the topic.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you so much for everybody for our little social there. We meet every Tuesday live on Zoom. I noticed a lot of new names. If you look into the chat, I put our Discord link as well as our meetup link. So you're welcome to visit us every Tuesday. And I'll just introduce Garrett. One moment. Okay, Garrett is a programmer turned award-winning software inventor turned entrepreneur. Platerate is his company. His hobby is writing and discussing practical philosophy, and he does life coaching on request to help people live happy, moral lives. He's also the executive director of the Free Thinker Institute, which aims to create a community that helps its members increase happiness and decrease harm for themselves and for those they can influence.
Great. Thank you, Ellie. So a little bit about the Free Thinker Institute. This event is organized through the Free Thinker Institute. We advertise to a lot of different meetups. So you very well could have seen us through a different one. But it all starts from the Free Thinker Institute, which is a not-for-profit looking to support and empower members. We really want to help people be the best versions of themselves, seek truth, and be fair through transformational personal and professional development. We have free events every Tuesday evening like this one, covering a wide range of topics, usually things not taught in academia or industry, at least not taught widely. And we have weekly members only events to apply practical philosophy into our daily lives. We have only one rule in the FTI, and that is to remain polite. Remaining polite helps us keep an open mind to new ideas and prevents what I call verbal boxing matches or verbal arms races. So if we stay polite, we avoid all that, and we stay in our rational part of our brain and have more meaningful conversations. So let's keep with that one rule. We do try to keep comments to one topic at a time and one question at a time after the presentation. I'm going to present first, and then we'll go into the questions discussions portion of the evening. I don't think the presentation will take too long. We'll see exactly how long it goes. And then that's really everything that I wanted to say before I share my screen. And so let me go ahead and share. And if I can get a quick thumbs up that people see my screen and I need to move. I have 3 monitors, so I'll be looking in all different directions. And if you could go on mute, if you're not talking, it would be great because we have a large group. and we all have to cough every once in a while. So thank you for the thumbs up, and you see the screen. So quick introduction or agenda. I kind of already introduced the Freethinker Institute, so I'll go past that. I'm going to talk about first what confirmation bias is. Two, I'm going to talk about what the benefits of confirmation bias. It didn't come from nowhere. There is a reason that it exists, and there are benefits to it. I'm going to talk about when we can completely ignore confirmation bias when it's not really that important. And then I'm going to talk about the dark side of confirmation bias, and then I'm going to talk about several. I think it's actually more than two now. I didn't update the agenda, techniques to combat confirmation bias. And then we'll go into the question and answer and discussion session of the evening. So from the Oxford Dictionary, confirmation bias is the tendency to interpret new evidence as confirmation of one's existing beliefs or theories. This essentially means that we favor evidence that supports our current beliefs, thinking that what we currently believe is right, and so we look for evidence that supports that it's right, and we give less credibility to evidence, or perhaps no credibility to evidence that tries to say that our current beliefs are wrong, because how could we possibly be wrong? And that's kind of what our confirmation bias tells us, is how could we possibly be wrong? But we all know that we can be wrong about just about anything we believe, not everything most likely, but there are probably certain things that are so likely to be true that they're not worth debating. But a lot of things we should be open to the possibility that they could be wrong. So let's talk about the benefits of confirmation bias. It does exist for a reason. So in theory, if we came to our conclusions through careful thought, we really want to think that we have a good reason for believing what we believe, right? We probably don't just believe things, the comment was made, oh, I read it, therefore I believe it, right? Most of us probably aren't convinced quite so easily that just because we read it somewhere, we're going to, plain believe it, even if the source that we read it from is not credible. Although some people do believe things when they read things from non-credible sources, but I don't think they recognize those sources aren't credible in the first place. So I think they think they're credible sources. So generally, we do have a good reason for believing that we come to, logical conclusions based on careful analysis when we initially come to our beliefs. And so given that time is limited, we can't really question everything. Like, if you like cornflakes, you can't question every morning, do I like cornflakes or do I not like cornflakes? I need to debate this. Do I like Cheerios more than cornflakes, and spend half an hour deciding between Cheerios and cornflakes? Not a really productive way to spend your morning, right? So time is limited. So we really have to filter out ideas that are very unlikely to be true. And I'll give an example of that. I always try to keep a very strong, low confirmation bias. And so when I met a flat earther for the first time, I went about trying to understand why this person thinks what they think, and try to question how could they have come to that conclusion, and what evidence did they have to come to that conclusion. I spent about 40 minutes of my life that I'll never get back, and I realized that this person, I don't know how they came to that conclusion, even after 40 minutes of trying to figure out how, other than they watched a YouTube video, which was very unconvincing. It just said, look at the ground and it's flat. So why isn't Earth flat? And so, there are certain things that probably aren't worth questioning, like whether or not Earth is flat is probably not worth questioning. But from, and so there is a purpose to confirmation bias. And so, you don't want to debate absolutely everything, right? You have to pick and choose what you debate and what you want to be open to. So that said, most of tonight's presentation is going to be about the bad parts of confirmation bias. But before I get to that, I'm going to say when you can ignore confirmation bias, which is if it's a topic, and Will sort of alluded to this earlier, if it's a topic that doesn't influence any meaningful decisions, then it's really not that important whether we challenge our confirmation bias or not, because it's not going to have any positive influence on our decision-making process. For example, last year I presented a hypothesis on the origins of the universe, which goes against, most modern cosmology. It sort of ties in with a little bit of Sir Penrose's cyclical cosmology, but maybe a slight twist, significant twist on what he talks about. But that said, that's not really the issue. The issue is, if your mind wasn't open to that hypothesis, no big deal, because whether or not I'm right about that hypothesis or not, it's not going to change anyone's day-to-day decision making, whether the universe is going to end eventually or whether humanity is going to end eventually in a heat death or a big crunch, or whether it's not going to, which I think it's not going to, or that it's possible to survive what happens, you know, in that kind of very long time frame. Now, if people go crazy saying, well, the universe is eventually going to end, so why should we care about anything right now? Then it becomes more relevant whether or not you believe in that long-term outcome. No one really does. Like, even though the long-term outcome is very dismal, according to cosmologists today, no one's worried about, like, that doesn't really impact people's day-to-day lives, and people aren't really getting into existential angst over the fact that the universe is going to end someday, according to cosmologists. And so the universe as we know it. So the second reason to ignore confirmation bias is if something is a part of what you consider your core beliefs or value system, then I would argue that it's not something that you should change for anyone or anything. And it's okay to ignore confirmation bias in that case, because it is a core part of your beliefs. But I would caution you to be very diligent about whether or not it's really a core value or belief, because a lot of people get caught up, and we talked about this before, where they take a belief like, you know, do people have free will, yes or no? And they make that a core part of their values or belief system, whereas really it's just an intellectual exercise, and it's, you know, learning about the universe. It's not a core value or belief. Now, if one of my values is to be very honest as a person, and someone is trying to get me to not be very honest as a person, and that I should be lying to improve my life, and just not be such an honest person, giving back someone's wallet with all the money in it, and they're trying to convince me not to do that, then I'm not going to necessarily ignore my confirmation bias, because, you know, for me, one of my values is honesty and seeking truth, which is why it's part of the FTI, because I think seeking truth is something that really, you know, applies to almost all of us. I think we all inherently want to seek truth. I think different people have different perspectives on what the truth is. That's part of what makes life interesting. But all I would say is that if it's a part of your core values and belief system, then, you know, less important to worry about confirmation bias. If it doesn't impact any meaningful decisions, less important to worry about confirmation bias. However, I would argue those are both a very small minority of the things that we talk about day in and day out. Most of the things we talk about do impact our decisions and are not a part of our core values and belief system. So in those areas, I'm going to talk about why confirmation bias is so bad. We all have misunderstandings about the world. We have them on a very regular basis. So no matter how smart we are, no matter how much we want to seek truth, we all have misunderstandings, and they can be small, they can be big. They're probably both, quite frankly. Those misunderstandings lead us to make poor decisions, and those decisions can lead to undesirable outcomes. So for example, let's say that you think that strangers are dangerous and you hesitate to meet new people and make new relationships. Well, people with more healthy relationships live longer, happier lives. So that misunderstanding that you don't want to meet new strangers, especially if you don't already have a core group of really close friends that you can relate to, could actually prevent you from living a long, happy life if you hold on to that misunderstanding. And also, I would argue the more people I've gotten to know, the more I found faith in humanity. Although we are very flawed as human beings, most people mean well and want to do the right thing. And I would argue that the times that people don't do the right thing, it's because of a misunderstanding. And remember, we said that misunderstandings are, we hold on to misunderstandings because of confirmation bias. So you can see where this is leading, is that the dark side of confirmation bias is that it prevents us from learning new things, especially about important topics where we can make better decisions with that new data. And that could be new information about the world, or it could be new wisdom. And I distinguish between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge being knowledge about the world that we live in, and wisdom being better decision-making processes. Wisdom is how do you make decisions that increase happiness and decrease harm, which I would argue is a better decision. and then knowledge is like, scientific knowledge or knowledge about the objective world that we live in. So confirmation bias leads us to ignore the facts that don't align with our beliefs. Remember, we said that was the definition, and it helps you discount the things that could be more accurate than the facts that you currently believe in, which leads to you not course correcting and making bad decisions based on misinformation, even though a clearer version of the truth that might lead to a much fairer outcome for yourself and for others, and helping you be a better version of yourself would have been available to you. So that's why it's so bad, is because it leads us to make bad decisions. It leads us to have misunderstandings about the world. Like, imagine the flat earthers, they're probably afraid to go in a plane, or, they're gonna fly off the edge of the world, or they don't want to take a boat because they're going to take that boat off the edge of the world. Like, it's a very limiting belief to have big misunderstandings about the objective world that we live in. And believe it or not, there are 300,000 flat earthers, over 300,000 in the US alone. So it's actually not as, that's a very small percentage of the population, but it's still a very scary number of people that think Earth is flat in 2023. I use that as an example because it's a very extreme example, and that makes for more clear communication, I think. But you can imagine that there are, half of the country right now says the other half watches fake news, and the half that they're accusing says that the first half watches fake news. So you know that there's a lot of misunderstanding because they can't both be right. One side is more well-grounded in reality than the other. And I recommend fact checking and looking for non-biased sources. For any news that you watch, look for non-biased sources that tell any facts that sound surprising to you. And that'll, I think, help you combat confirmation bias rather than just listening to biased sources. So let's give an example of the dark side of confirmation bias. If, for example, you believe that, and I'm going to use vaccination because we just did an event on this recently, we talked about how looking at scientific data that's been vetted by, if not tens of thousands, probably thousands at the least of people gathered by large numbers of people, it would be unfathomable to imagine that everybody that gathered the publicly available COVID data was all under the same conspiracy. A conspiracy that big would just be, incredibly powerful. And why would they go about caring about a COVID vaccine or a non-vaccine if they had that kind of power? So for me, the data that I presented last time seems quite solid. And what it said is that you're 17 times more likely to die if you're not fully vaccinated and you're unvaccinated. And so not only that, you're also far more likely to spread COVID if you're not fully vaccinated. And so you're unintentionally spreading it to people who may die from it. And your friends who also don't believe in vaccination are the ones that are most likely to die from it, because the unvaccinated populations are the ones most at risk, especially the older unvaccinated populations. So that confirmation bias could not only kill you, but it could kill many of the people that you hold dear in life, including the elderly, especially the elderly who are at the greatest risk, as we learned from the, if you didn't already know it, we learned from the event that we had on COVID vaccination. So that's just an example of how confirmation bias can lead someone to make a decision that not only can put their own lives at risk, but the lives of people that are close to them at risk as well. So some tactics for combating confirmation bias. Embracing humility and aiming for truth and fairness is number one. You want to have the humility to accept that not just some, but maybe even a lot of what you currently believe is a misunderstanding of the world. And having that humility to be open to the possibility. I'm not telling you everything you think is wrong. That's not the point here. It's that you should be open that many of the things that you even hold dear to you might be wrong, and you should entertain the possibility that those things might be wrong, which takes a lot of humility. It takes humility to accept that we're wrong. But I think I have the saying later, but if we accept that we're wrong with good judgment, we're immediately right again. We're just more right than we were before. So actually having the humility to accept we're wrong makes us more right than we are when we don't have the humility to accept that we're wrong. As long as you're accepting you're wrong with good judgment and good critical thinking skills. So, you know, you also have to have the humility to accept that some of what you think is wisdom is actually folly, like not a good idea and not good wisdom. And, you know, a lot of people throw around the quote, just to give an example of that, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And they say that quote to say that you shouldn't have good intentions. That's not even what the quote means. That's a total misunderstanding of the quote that I had most of my life until a friend of mine explained it, because I was like, he said the quote and I'm like, I hate that quote because it's like, when am I supposed to have bad intentions? And he's like, no, Garrett, that's not what this quote means. What it means is good intentions alone aren't enough. You need to have good intentions plus good actions. And so the road to hell is paved with good intentions where you don't take action on those good intentions. And so he taught me a piece of wisdom from something that I thought was folly. And so I had the humility to learn from him that.
I don't think that's what the quote means. I
Well,
think that quote.
You're welcome to disagree with me after the presentation, but please wait until after the presentation. So have your aim be to be the best version of yourself, to seek truth and to be fair, which is really the first intention of the FTI, and have the humility to accept that some of the things that you think are right are wrong. And I will listen to Agatha's alternative perspective with an open mind once I finish the presentation, which I would encourage everybody to do at all times, is always listen with an open mind. And that's going to be the next way of combating confirmation bias, which is when you meet someone with a different opinion of yours, you want to suspend all of your current beliefs. This is something that I got from the concept of something called a Bohm dialogue, which is from Bohm, the famous physicist. And what he said is, in a conversation, you should suspend all your current beliefs and just be able to riff on each other's ideas in the Bohm conversation, and just leave behind all your preconceived notions. It's a way of kind of trying to completely dismiss all of your current beliefs and your confirmation bias. And really doing that opens your mind to new ideas. And what I recommend doing is what I call listening to understand, which is to focus on listening to your conversation partner first and foremost. Use reflective listening to show you've actually heard them by repeating back what you think you've heard them say, especially if it sounds shocking and surprising. I think you'll find that when you repeat back something that someone says that you think is shocking, 95% of the time that I do that, that's not really what they meant. I just misunderstood them. And that's why reflective listening is so helpful, because it creates better communication. When you're really shocked by what someone says, always best to reflect it back to them in reflective listening, and you'll get more clarity on what they actually meant. And then asking thoughtful questions that understand why they came to their conclusion is really helpful. That'll help you understand what their underlying assumptions are, which I refer to as axioms. In logic, they're axioms. And what are the logic or the sort of rules of inference, if you will, that they've used from their underlying assumptions to come to their conclusions. If you can really trace their logic, then if there's a flaw in their logic, you might be able to point it out, but you shouldn't do it until you really, really understand their perspective. Now, if they have better reasons for coming to their conclusions than you do for yours, then wow, you just learned something, right? And you learned something, and you did it by combating your confirmation bias, by focusing on listening to another person's perspective first and foremost. And please don't use the whiteboard. I forgot to disable whiteboard. There we go. All right. So the next thing is honing your critical thinking skills. I think that was the next one. Yes. So honing your critical thinking skills is really like honing your ability to think logically, to get from underlying assumptions that are very sound and using those underlying assumptions along with logic to come to conclusions that are defendable. And if you start with really sound underlying assumptions and you use logic, you'll create what's called a consistent knowledge base, which means that it's very solid ground to stand on. Now, I held another event last year where we talked about how consistent knowledge bases don't actually have all the knowledge in the universe. And so in order to really know everything that's true, you kind of have to delve into that inconsistent area, which is where science, which is where philosophy, religion, and spirituality dwell. That's another conversation for another day, but without going into it in detail, it's very valuable to have a very strong, solid, consistent knowledge base, which helps you discern fact from fiction much better, and will also improve your ability to tell wisdom from folly, although a lot of the wisdom versus folly can also delve into that inconsistent knowledge base. But there's also a lot to be learned in the consistent knowledge base side. So as you listen to other people's opinions and criticisms, you'll find you can learn from everybody you meet. You can learn from people who are even like, you may not consider super intelligent, but you may learn things from them anyway. At least you learn how they came to the conclusions that they did and why they came to them. And if nothing else, that can be very insightful. So in the future, we're going to do an event on formal logic to help us all hone our critical thinking skills. That's one of the 5 intentions, is to hone our critical thinking skills in the Freethinker Institute. The second intention is to transparently share our beliefs and listen with an open mind to other ideas. I already talked about the first, so you're getting the sense that combating confirmation bias is very near and dear to all of the first 3 of the 5 intentions, really. So then another tactic for combating confirmation bias is just not to be afraid to change your mind. And this is where I say, if you use good judgment to admit you're wrong, you're immediately right again. You're just more right than you were before. 4 things that you want to keep in mind in a discussion. This came from Daniel Dennett, and I thought it was great wisdom. Is first, express back the person's opinion so clearly to them that they feel like you get it. And then second, list where you agree with them. That builds a bridge between your conversation partner about, instead of just here's where I disagree, which is what most people jump to, list the things you agree with them on and list what you learned from them, because we all have things to learn from other people. And even if we don't agree to their conclusions, they may introduce facts to us that we didn't know about. Acknowledge that fact. Acknowledge that you learned something from them. That's a part of being humble about our current knowledge, is admitting when we learn new things from other people. And then, and only then, should you actually say where you disagree with them along with why, so that if you've really understood their perspective and how they came to their conclusions, then a criticism of their opinions will be a much more well-informed one, rather than what most people do, which is skimming at the surface and disagreeing about the surface level topic, where usually there's a lack of ability to find the root cause of the disagreement. Whereas if you get into a meaningful conversation starting from assumptions and building up the logical argument and understanding the other person's perspective, you'll get to the root cause of your disagreement, and you'll actually be much more prone to combat your confirmation bias, because you're listening with an open mind to ideas that don't agree with your current beliefs. There's another good quote that I should have put in here about, I forget how it goes, and someone might be able to remember it and share it after the presentation, which is close to over, which is about the sign of a mature mind is one that can, hold and entertain beliefs other than the ones that they currently are holding on to. And so, I forget the exact quote for that one. But another tactic is transparency and open-mindedness, which I mentioned is the second intention. And that is, when you share your ideas transparently with your conversation partner, when they respond, you don't want to become defensive about your current beliefs. There are things that you've come to believe, but they're not necessarily a core part of who you are. If you find yourself being emotional, try to take a break, because when you're emotional, you're not going to be thinking rationally, and you're not going to be open to new ideas. You're not going to be open-minded when you're emotional. So make sure that you're in your rational brain in a calm, cool, collected state when someone is disagreeing with you, and consider teaching your conversation partner to listen with an open mind, listen to understand when you're speaking, so they can understand your perspective. So you can transparently share your whole opinion along with why you came to it with them, and then let them explain their position, why they came to it to you. And now you're going to have a much deeper understanding of each other's perspective and why you came to your perspective, the root cause of why you came to your perspective, rather than the surface level conclusions you came to, which is really where most people have conversations, is on the surface. So when your conversation partner objects to your axioms or your logic, you want to make a strong effort to be open-minded to what they say and look for trying to be the best version of yourself, seeking truth and being fair. And say, if I'm really honest with myself and I really want to seek truth rather than to be right, is it possible that this person has new information, new data, new wisdom, new knowledge that they can offer me, and keep an open mind that they may. And an example of success. So these techniques can not only free yourself from confirmation bias, but they can free others as well. Daryl Davis is a musician who convinced 200 KKK members to no longer be racist. He basically used a lot of the techniques we discussed today by asking racists thoughtful questions about why they were racist. And they couldn't come up with good reasons for being racist. It was like, well, my dad was always racist and he taught me to be racist. But they also recognized that wasn't a good reason to be racist in the first place. And ultimately, he changed 200 extreme racists' minds to no longer be racist. So listening, and he did more listening. He didn't tell them they were wrong. He didn't tell them they were bad people. He listened to them, and he listened to why they were racist, and he asked them thoughtful questions. And by doing that, you learn much more from the other person than you do by restating your beliefs. You also learn why they think what they do, and you can actually attack any bad beliefs that they have or any misunderstandings. I shouldn't say bad beliefs, but any misunderstandings that they have, at the root cause rather than at the surface level. Because at the surface level, we've all kind of made up our mind and we have our confirmation bias, and people are usually not likely to change their opinions about the surface level opinions. But when you delve down into why people came up with those opinions, if you can actually find a reason that the foundational opinions, and this is what I learned from reading about Daryl Douglas, he attacked the foundational reasons for why people are racist. And by attacking the foundations, and he didn't even attack them, he just asked thoughtful questions that made the racists realize they didn't have a reason for being racist. And in doing that, he made them change their own minds about being racist. And so I think actually, asking thoughtful questions, which is Socratic method, which didn't end well for Socrates theoretically, but he is still very famous, and he was a really smart guy. He, for those that don't know, got sentenced to death for embarrassing publicly too many people. He was a little too aggressive with his questions, I would say. Maybe keep it a little toned down and don't go after the big politicians when you're asking these thoughtful questions. The more you learn, though, as you learn more and are more convincing, you'll find that listening to others rather than asserting your beliefs is really the best way to convince other people. You convince more by listening, even though it sounds very contradictory. And so I like to have summary slides. And so I have two summary slides for this. One is about listening and sharing with others. I'll share the deck in the online community afterwards. I'll share it in the chat as well. And then I have another summary slide here about just plain combating confirmation bias. And with that said, I'm going to end the presentation and ask, for people to have questions. Was this helpful? Did you learn something? Whatever people want to say about the presentation or about the topic in general. And go ahead and raise your hand, and I'll remind everyone to stick with one comment or one question at a time. And after you ask your comment, after you make your comment or ask your question, you can drop your hand and raise it again and then ask the next one. Today, good to see you again.
Hi, good to be back. Garrett's been a minute, but hi everybody. For those that know who I am, I'm Tanae. I'm actually one of the facilitators for the Connections Humanist group, things of that nature, and I'm so glad we could bind it. So about this entire conversation, I kind of tend to stay away from those who are looking at misinformed text, because I know that there will be a particular sense of bias when it comes to who's right and who's wrong. So as far as social media is concerned, I have to minimize what I see, because everybody has their opinion about one thing and everybody has a different thing, because I always hear it's two sides to every story, his story, her story, and then there's the truth. So I think my question to you is, how do I differentiate what is real and what's not? even though social media is more like smoke and mirrors.
Say the last sentence again, sorry.
I said, how do I kind of separate the real from the fake, even though social media is considered to be almost like smoke and mirrors, like a Hollywood type of.
That's a great question. So we should actually have another event where we focus on just truth and how to find truth. And I have a presentation or a paper on that, or an essay on that, which I'll share with you. And I came up with a bunch of rules that make someone more or less trustworthy. And this is not it. So I'll try to find that. Maybe it's not called On Truth, but I think that there's a long list of things like, you know, if someone is saying things that are not in their own best interests, they're more credible. You know, if someone has a history of telling the truth and of telling you things that turned out to be true when you fact check them from unbiased sources, then that gives them more credibility. And so, you know, there's a lot of aspects that go into that. And I don't know why I'm blanking on the name of that essay. Trust. I think it might be trust. Oh, you know what? It's in my other I think it's on trust. Yeah. So it's on what makes someone trustworthy or untrustworthy. So I'll share that for you today, because that's really my answer after having done a lot of deep thought about it. And so I put it into the chat for you, and I'll put it in the online community as well. Omalola, am I pronouncing that okay?
Yeah, you are. Hi, I'm Amalula, everyone. I live in South Jersey, about 20 minutes outside of Philly. My question was, because at some point in the presentation, you talked about unbiased news sources. I don't know any unbiased news sources. So what are some examples of that in America?
So if you go to Media Bias Fact Check, what it does is it looks at the political bias of the news source. And there's left-wing news, there's right-wing news, and there's centrist news. And when I said unbiased sources, what I meant was not even news sources, but sources like, you know, the CDC, for example, which is an apolitical organization that's a government entity that gets people put into it from Republican Party, from the Democratic Party, from independents. Like, it's a completely politically unbiased source. So if you look at CDC numbers, there's no political bias in CDC numbers. They're just the numbers that the CDC comes up with. When you look at news sources, you can look at the political bias of the news source. And what I can say is that since the Iraq War, when I started doing this, I fact-checked right-wing news, left-wing news, and centrist news on any major topics that, you know, I felt really strongly about. And what I found is that they all omit, like the right wing and the left wing both omit things that make it look like that favor the other side. The centrist news omits any facts that make it seem like it's biased towards the left or the right. And then one of the two makes stuff up. I'm not going to say which one, but I'm going to leave it to each viewer to read right wing and left wing news. And when something sounds outrageous, try to find someone without the same political bias saying the same thing. And if you can't find it, it's unlikely that it's actually true. And I will tell you that one of the two is more trustworthy than the other. And it's a very stark difference between the two. But that said, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does to an extent. I think there's just no unbiased news sources.
Yeah, and you know, I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's not that it's not that it's an unbiased source, meaning that it has absolutely zero bias. But if you look at people that have a mix of left, right, and center, and there's no overwhelming force that would lie for its political opinions in charge, like if someone tries to make a right-wing lie, then the left-wing people and the centrist people will say, no, then, you know, we're not going to allow that to be said from our organization. And so if you get an organization that has enough of a mix politically and doesn't have any political motivations, that's what I'm talking about when I say unbiased. But really what you need to do is you need to look at everyone with their biases taken into consideration when you look at the news, because the news has a bias towards even being centrist is a bias, right? Like the centrist people need to make themselves seem centrist. And so they have to avoid saying any facts that will make them look left-wing or right-wing. And so they will avoid facts that are actually very relevant to a scenario, and they'll just omit them entirely, because if they mention that fact, they would look like they were supporting either the right or the left, and they don't mention them. And so you have to, in the news, you have to read right-wing news, left-wing news, centrist news, and you have to fact check anything that sounds really shocking.
Thank you.
Susan.
Yes, hello, yeah. My question is, if bias is such a different opinion on the same subject, but you know, if you say left wing and right wing, they have different bias to one event. So how? Okay, for example, right? Can you classify the recent event? The Prime Minister of New Zealand, she resigned. Is that a case of bias in her country, because she is like warmly approved by other leaders? You know how she conduct her, you know, her office.
Susan, I think if you look at there was a place where I saw pictures, and I think it was only of the US presidents, but I think it applies to any head of state. They showed pictures of like 10 presidents before they went into office and after they left office. And if these people at most aged 8 years, but some of them look like they aged 30 years. I mean, the level of stress and the level of scrutiny and the level of criticism that people in positions of power get are so intense. You know, the number of death threats that they get are, you know, imagine how that would play on your psyche. You know, I don't want people giving me death threats all the time. Like that's not, you know, that's not an ideal sort of scenario. And so she is a very politically, you know, she's a very political player, and she stood for a lot of, you know, strong values, and she stood for them squarely, and she fought against people who, you know, questioned her values, and that takes a lot of strength. But I, you know, from what I read, she got tired, and she said, "Time to throw in the towel. I'm tired."
Right. Yeah, she a very kind leader, you know, very young and kind, and she open, and she very supportive to the youth group that creating such a issue in her country. She stood by them, you know, like she tried to create an environment so that they can grow instead of causing trouble. Yeah, but yeah, it just. Yeah. But why can't they just help her to run the country? So why would they throw out death threat to her? Why would she want?
Even
they want
George
her
Washington, who people wanted to be president for life, stood down after two terms. So you know, I think it makes sense for all leaders to step aside eventually and let other people rise up and show their leadership. And you know, she made a personal decision, Susan, that she didn't have any more strength to fight as hard as she had been fighting when she was in that leadership position. And so now it's time for someone else to rise up and fight the good fight, you know, in that leadership position. So that's I don't want a lot, but
but they have the election. Yeah, I'm sorry, I have to cut you up, but they have the election coming up. She resigned, you know, before the election. You know, can you wait? I mean, with all the death threat, like you say, you know, I would like to step out too. I don't want to subject my family and myself to that.
Yeah.
But why do they do that?
I can't tell you any more insight.
Was she actually getting death threats still?
I don't know if she was personally, but I know a lot of people in leadership roles, like a lot of people in you know, leadership roles, at least in the US do. You know, I am not super familiar. We have some Aussies here who are probably more familiar with her situation that might be able to speak to that. And feel free to raise your hands, guys, if you have any insights more than that you can offer. That said, I want a lot. And I apologize if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. Is it Chanis? Shanice?
Shanice, yeah, you said it right the second time. Hi.
Welcome.
Yeah, I thank you. This is my first time joining. I think I have more of a comment than a question per se. And I wanted to bring it back down to the topic of today's conversation around cognitive and just confirmation biases. And also kind of reply to Tanae, I believe, who made a comment earlier. I do recognize when conversations like this go on, we tend to steer away from the direction of what a lot of your presentation was emphasizing was more so around the accountability of the individual instead of the projection or just like the fear that we naturally have towards others when it comes to trusting whether we could believe somebody or not, and all the things that obscures our ability to make rational judgment. So like if we were to come back down to like the fundamentals of what you're saying and being centered around like how do we rationalize, how do we reason and think logically, I think being able to have a strong foundation around that is what's going to allow us to be able to be a lot more aware of our own biases and have more openness to engage in conversations with others. So I think it comes more down to a lack of self-trust, like trust within ourselves to be able to be or have the awareness to know when we're kind of interacting or engaging in, you know, something that is steering more so away from like, let's say topics around objective morality, what is right and what is wrong, because it is such a complex idea and it is constantly evolving and changing with time. So it's hard to say concretely what it is in the moment, but having some principles around like, well, how can we rationalize ourselves and know whether we are wrong or know when someone else is wrong is what I think we're trying to aim for. And so some of the things inside of your presentation did bring that to light, and I do appreciate that. But coming back down to the ideas of like, well, how do I know when to trust people or who's right, who's wrong, who's lying? Well, we are very faulty individuals, and so our perception, our memory, and everything is just cannot be guaranteed. So we do rely on things that is constant and that do remain constant to be able to help us, navigate these. So I kind of want to just reply to that for today, but yeah.
Yeah, you're honing in on objective morality, which is a key subject that I think we need to talk about another night, although I'm not prepared for it yet because I'm rewriting my essay on that subject. I think what you were saying, if I understood right, and tell me if I misunderstood, is that we're all striving to do what we think is right, but what we need to do is have the humility to and the good judgment to know who to trust and how much to trust them, and to not trust ourselves so much that we don't trust the opinions of others. Am I summarizing that right?
I think I have a little bit backwards. It's more so being able to trust ourselves more to know how to hold ourselves and others, just like to, I guess,
So that's good. I think then I agree with you even more than I thought I did. I think what you're saying is we need to trust our own judgment first and foremost, including trusting our own judgment about who else we should trust. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and how we have the capacity to be wrong in our own judgment. So like the openness is, I think, what I was trying to strive for. Yeah.
I think that's a great point, and that's why the third intention is the ability to hone our critical thinking skills, because ultimately I think we should all trust ourselves first and foremost, and that's why we're called the Free Thinker Institute, because I think we want to teach everyone to be able to rely on their own judgment, not necessarily that they have to make every decision solely isolated as a human being individually, but that they know who they can put their trust in and who they can't. But ultimately, we should trust ourselves first and foremost, and we should learn to improve our judgment so we can trust ourselves first and foremost and do it with good reliability and good results. And that said, I want to let Jose go.
Yes. First, congratulations. I thought it was a very impressive presentation.
Thank you.
I'm not new to the subject of confirmation bias, and I wanted to build on a couple of points. One of them is what Omolola said. How can we, I mean, there is no unbiased organization out there of source of news. I would extend that to say there's no unbiased individual in the world. So if there is no unbiased individual in the world, and a news organization has a hierarchy and an editor and whatever it is, somebody is picking from the millions of pieces of information, the ones that they want to show. So they've got to have some bias in the process. Having said that, though, I think the problem, it doesn't lie necessarily on the logic. I feel very well-educated people, I know very well-educated people that are completely hijacked by conspiracy theories and things that basically defy any logic. I think the problem is psychological more than logical. It is not the lack of critical thinking that allows some people to hang on to some beliefs. And this is the point I wanted to make about the name of your institution, free thinking or free thinker. What does free thinker mean?
Yeah.
Free thinker means that you are free of what? You are free of all the biases, collection of beliefs, experiences, your own interpretation in your life. We all carry a very heavy baggage of experiences that have impacted and will continue to impact our thinking. So logic is good, but if you reject the notion that the freedom of thinking lies within you, probably you will remain a slave thinker as opposed to a free thinker. And just to finish, my daughter asked me some time ago the question that you're discussing here is who can I believe? Who can I believe? And I said, I will follow 2 or 3 rules. Number one is whatever you hear as an argument, as a claim, as a statement, find the opposite view of that claim. So if you hear about what's going on in the Ukraine by US sources, find other sources. If you can get Russian sources, find other sources. Okay, and who do I choose? Well, there comes your free thinking.
Yeah.
Then you listen to the arguments, the reasoning of every one of those 2, and if you want to pick one, you pick the one with a more solid argument, assuming that you have cleared yourself from all your own biases. Because if you're going to have to carry on with your own biases, you're going to pick the one that fits best your story, as opposed to the one that is closer to the truth. That's all.
Yeah, those are
I'm sorry, I have to interject something. You assume that all conspiracy theorists are nut jobs. From your tone of voice, that's what I'm getting. That is not true. I have to defend my people. Conspiracy theories have often proven to be 100% correct. For instance, the CIA does tons of revolutions in Latin American countries and Middle Eastern countries as well. The Shah was installed by a coup that was sponsored by the CIA. That's not a crackpot notion. That's been proven.
Yeah, Agatha, if you don't mind, just raise your hand. Those are great points, and I wouldn't call that a conspiracy theory. That's just part of history. It's an acknowledged history of some of the evil deeds of the CIA. So I don't think that's what Jose, and I didn't hear Jose disparaging people who, believe in conspiracy theories, because I think that we should all keep our mind open that a conspiracy theory might be true, because if we don't give it the benefit of the doubt, like before the point about the CIA, unseating the democratically elected government of Iran came out, like there were probably whispers of it, and it probably was a conspiracy theory at some point and unverified. Now we know that it is actually a verified fact. And so I'll agree with you, Agatha, that we should always keep an open mind to whatever data comes out, but we also need to have a healthy enough skepticism that if something sounds so unfathomably unlikely to be true, that it might just be that it is not true. And so
Another example, Jeffrey Epstein was absolutely murdered by the CIA at the behest of the Clintons and Trump.
Okay.
So Agatha, if you could raise your hand, there's a lot of people with hands up right now.
Garrett, can I say something about
John.
this lady? Can I say, give me 1 minute about it? He said like CIA, help coup in South America or Iran. Can I say something?
We'll get to you. Go ahead and say it when it's your turn, if that's okay. I want to let Rachel go because she's been waiting patiently and we have a large number of people with their hands up right now. So if we can go in order, I think that's the most fair way to do it. Keep your hand up, Sean. I do want to hear what you have to say, but I also don't want to go out of turn. So Rachel, go ahead. Good to see you again.
Yeah, thanks. Good to see you as well. Good to see everyone, those here at the COVID vaccine topic. But I wanted to speak on something you talked about in your presentation about like Socratic questioning, because I actually, like, nothing came to mind when I thought, well, what is Socratic questioning? So I looked it up and found a few answers. But what my mind did go to was, I don't know if you guys are aware of who Kevin Kelly is, but he has like all these pieces of life advice that he has shared, things that he wish he knew when he was younger. And one of them is basically to get to the real why of somebody and like why someone holds a certain belief, ask them 3 times for clarification or what their actual reason for holding to a belief is. I thought that would be helpful, but I also just wanted to conjoin that thought with, I think you focused on in your presentation on emphasizing like listen to somebody. I do think if you're going to change their mind, it's essential to be paired with that Socratic questioning. I think you really have to make somebody dig deeper if you're going to get them to change it all. Because if you're just saying, hey, what's your story? What are your beliefs? Oftentimes when people are challenged to just say what they think, it's just like reconfirming what they already think. So the challenging portion, like the questioning portion, I think is essential. And I was going to ask you if you have a list of questions that you ask to get to a deeper meaning when you're in conversation with people.
It's a great question. It's something I need to think more about. And I agree with you completely, Rachel. I think that the art is really in how you ask the questions, because you want to ask questions that do challenge the assumptions that someone had, but don't challenge them so strongly that they see you as an enemy. You want to ask them so that they ask themselves the same questions and they go, oh, that's actually a very reasonable question. I should have an answer to that. And when they don't have an answer, then they go, oh, maybe I don't have a good answer to that. And maybe I should be rethinking that belief because this person asked me a very thoughtful question that I don't have a good answer to. And I really should have a good answer if I believe that. I'll give an example because Agatha likes the conspiracy theory angle. I'll give an example of a conspiracy theory is there's one conspiracy theory that all of the Democratic leaders are cannibal pedophiles. But if you think about it, the majority of justices in the US are actually conservative appointees at this point because McConnell stopped Obama from appointing people to the federal courts. So the large percentage of federal court appointees are Republicans. And if that were true, there are many Republicans that would love to put in jail all the Democratic leaders. So why wouldn't they just sue them and then have those Republican justices put them in jail for being cannibal pedophiles? So, when you use a certain level of logical scrutiny, if you can ask someone, who believes in that conspiracy theory, so why is it that no one has prosecuted these Democratic leaders? I would love to know, and maybe Agatha, you could raise your hand if you have an answer to that. Why has nobody?
Excuse me, but Bill Clinton was caught having sex with teenagers. Jeffrey Epstein was supplying them, and Bill Clinton is a Democrat.
Agatha,
Bill Richardson.
Agatha, please do raise your hand.
I don't think she's right. Okay, we're just ridiculous.
Please do raise your hand when you want to speak, Agatha. Like we have again a long list of people that have their hands raised. And I am intending to engage you, Agatha, and I want to hear your perspective, but I want to do it in a fair way, which allows everybody the chance to speak. So, Josh, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah. Let me get myself okay, there we go. Yeah, this isn't going to be a very popular point of view that I'm going to present, but I'm curious to hear your response to it, because you're coming at this from a realist point of view, which presupposes that there is a single objective reality, and that we're all have to measure our quote unquote biases against. But you're probably aware that there are entire communities within philosophy and now within psychology. Many of them, consider themselves within the postmodern camp, that argue that that there is it's dangerous to assume that what we have to measure ourselves against is some sort of a veridical single notion of what is real, because the way that we look at the world is a function of what our purposes are. In other words, we interpret the meaning of events in relation to our aims and our goals. And so in a sense, each of us live in slightly different worlds. And so what you end up with is an endless kind of a moralistic finger pointing on the basis of this assumption that, there's a correct perspective and one side or the other gets it wrong. And so the whole notion of cognitive bias is sort of presupposes that point of view, kind of like the original approaches within cognitive therapy, which assume that there's a correct reality, and then our schemes of understanding can become distorted with respect to the correct set of facts. But more recent approaches talk more about what's adaptive to us in terms of our ability to get along with people, rather than lashing upon the veridical truths of the world. We're never going to end up getting along with each other if, especially in the current polarized circumstances, political circumstances, if we assume that one side has the monopoly of truth over the other, and even the notion that there's some sort of a medium truth that we can arrive at by sort of striking the difference between the sides, I think it misses the point. The most difficult thing in the world for any individual to do is to recognize that the other person's perspective, that their set of facts is guided and made intelligible by the larger framework of interpretation. And what we have a resistance to doing is to assuming that within their way of looking at the world, that they feel justified in their actions. And so rather than attacking the objectivity of the perspective, we can get along with others more effectively by stepping inside of their perspective and understanding why the world appears the way it does to them. Then there are ways that we can kind of negotiate and find ways of accepting each other and coming upon maybe some shared useful understandings among us, rather than holding on to this notion of the objective truths, which more and more the philosophical community is moving away from.
So do you think, I gave the example of flat earthers. Do you think it's not objectively true that Earth is an oblate spheroid, and that it is equally possible that Earth is flat?
Everything that is involved in that conception of it involves the way that the measuring devices that we've invented in order to take a look at the Earth, and those measuring devices are part and parcel of the conceptualization itself. So in other words, we're not there's a rich kind of a framework within which the facts appear differently than they did within. It's not as if we're looking that we arrive at this new conception with the same set of larger facts. Everything about you have to think about the scientific truths in terms of paradigms, and paradigms are like gestalts. Every piece is the meaning of every piece of the gestalt in the scientific theory is defined by its relationship to every other. So you turn the thing on its head, which is what happens when you have a change in scientific conceptions, for example, from the Newtonian worldview to the Einsteinian to the quantum worldview. These are different ways of looking at the world. It's like those optical illusions where you can see the old woman or the young woman, but you can't see both at the same time, because every piece, every pixel within that picture has its role redefined. So you're not really looking at the same world, which is why we end up talking past each other.
I agree with your point that you know, that we shouldn't consider that one side, like left or right or Republican or Democrat, has the exclusive hold on the truth. But I guess I don't tend to buy the postmodernist view that there is no such thing as truth, that the whole idea of objective truth is nonsense. And we're going to have Remco give a presentation on Wittgenstein to sort of lay the groundwork for postmodernism. So you should come to that event because that'll be what that's about. I think you'll like it. I'm looking to learn, you know, to combat my own confirmation bias, where, you know, one of my core values is to seek truth, to seek objective truth. And I'm willing to combat my own confirmation bias that, you know, maybe objective truth isn't the right thing to seek. But for right now, I believe Earth is an oblate spheroid. And I think that the science is very clear about that. And I think it's very, very unlikely that Earth is flat. Now, theoretically, if Earth was flat, everything else that I know goes out the window. I don't even know if I exist myself. And at that point, you know, I can't really live my life questioning at that level of lack of clarity. And so for me, just from a pragmatic perspective, you know, believing in objective reality makes a lot of sense. So that said, I do appreciate your opinion, Josh. It is very intellectually interesting. Although I would argue that it may lack in practicality the level of intellectual interest that it also has. But I do want to let Avery go, if that's okay, Josh. Hi, Avery.
Hey, how's it going? Yeah, so I guess the main issue that I have in my own thinking in terms of like confirmation bias is just basically getting back to the presentation. I think in the presentation it was that not all ideas are kind of equally worth putting effort into understanding. And if we grant that idea, like if we say that that's true, then we're not really ever going to truly arrive at objective truth. Like, okay, I believe in objective truth in that it exists, but I think that arriving at it is a grand, immense task that I think is beyond human capacity. So in the sense that, and that's sort of the reason why I believe that, is basically because of not really having the value or really having the time or resources to really fully get to what is objectively true. Like, for example, we would have to basically have infinite arguments about very meaningless stuff to really get to objective truth, in my opinion. So I think that that might not even be fully worth kind of pursuing, in a sense. Like, it is and it isn't, depending on what the goal is, I guess. Like, you know, do we need to answer every question? And I would say no, most likely not. Like, do we need to really understand like why a flat earther believes in flat earth? It depending on why they believe that, of course. I mean, also depending on how possible it is to convince someone otherwise. So I think it would require people to be very open-minded as well. So I think that, you know, it just depends. I guess if the person who is a flat earther is capable of looking at genuine evidence, and but then again, that's also debatable. But I do believe we could present the evidence, but even that would not convince some flat earthers or even some people. And so I would think that when, like, how do you really decide which is important to understand and which isn't important to understand? And at that point, can we really, like, I just feel like it's almost impossible to really fully fulfill the task of finding objective truth, unfortunately.
Yeah, this is one of those things where I would agree with you. Sorry, I'm drinking water. I agree with you. It's impossible to clearly see all of the truth, which is basically called omniscience, right? I don't think any of us thinks that we're going to be omniscient. I think, you know, rather than be omniscient, and the reason that the first intention says to seek truth, not to know the truth, is because we recognize as an organization that none of us is ever going to know absolute truth for 100% certainty. Like I said, I don't even know with 100% certainty that I exist. Like maybe I'm a figment of my own imagination, like who knows, right? And so like you can't necessarily know anything with absolute certainty, but you can know things with degrees of certainty, which my epistemology for the philosophical folks here is Bayesian epistemology, which means the more likely it is for something to be true, the more I'm going to believe it. And at this point, Earth being an oblate spheroid, I think is so likely to be true that it's no longer worth questioning for me. I'm going to question other parts of life, and I'm going to look for seeking truth in other areas because I find them more fertile territory. And so we have to pick and choose. And I agree with you that we don't need the answer to every question. And in fact, all of us sort of pick and choose where we want to spend our lives seeking truth about different parts of the world. That's why some people are, you know, astrophysicists, and other people are biologists, and other people are business people. We want to find truths in those areas of the world. But I would argue we all have an inherent desire to seek truth. And that's what we should be doing, is seeking truth in the areas that are important to us and making sure that we don't get stuck in our confirmation bias, because when we get stuck there, we don't see those new truths, even about the areas that we care about, because we're stuck with the truth that we originally thought 10 years ago when we first learned that thing that we learned. Even though we thought we were justified at the time, it turned out not to be great justification, which was discovered 5 years later by some scientific experiment. And so that's why I would argue we should combat our confirmation bias, if that makes sense. And with that said, I want to let Ben go next.
Sure.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Really enlightening discussion. I was just reflecting on a comment you were making in the presentation about, you know, the sentence about, or the saying about the road to hell being paved with good intentions, and your friend talking about, you know, that it was good actions. And as I always sort of interpreted it, it's, you know, just like, how do we know what are good actions? And it's like the consequences of the actions are sort of like what determines if that was like a good action to take. You know, like a certain amount is hindsight being 20/20, but it's through trial and error we sort of learn what behaviors align with the desired outcomes, and we learn how to like harmonize our actions with our intentions. And that's what, you know, leads to the positive results that we're seeking. And I think it was Agatha, somebody made a comment about, you know, what the statement meant, but we didn't get to hear the rest of that. So I just wanted to make a comment and see if that person is still available to comment.
Yeah,
Thanks.
I would love, if Agatha's still here, I would love for her to raise her hand and share her opinion. I just wanted her to do it in turn. Unfortunately, I think she may have left. But yeah. So to your point about you know, what are good actions, I would argue that the first step to good actions is to see the truth clearly. In order to know whether or not something is a good action, you have to see the truth clearly, because if you have a complete misunderstanding about the situation, what you think is good might turn out to be very wrong. And I would actually argue that all the people doing evil in the world really think they're doing good. They just have a misunderstanding about the world. So I don't think there are really truly evil people. I think we all just have misunderstandings that lead us to do things that other people see as evil. And it's because of our misunderstandings that we do them. So I would argue, first, you have to see the truth clearly. Once you see the truth clearly, I would argue that if you're increasing happiness and decreasing harm, that is a good action. And, you know, I've tried to look for counterexamples to that. I'm going to try to present that in a logical, with a logical argument at our conversation on objective morality. There is some nuance to that very simplified statement that I'll present at that time, but we're, you know, tonight's not about objective morality, but you know, I guess it's come up a couple of times, so I just thought I'd touch on it. Does that make sense, Ben? And you know, if you have a different opinion, you're welcome to share it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I guess the point I'm just trying to make is that a lot of times, we act out of ignorance. We don't have the whole picture. We have to do something, or not act. I mean, and sometimes there is a catatonic response where uncertainty causes us not to act. I think there's a parable that might have come from Greece, comparing life to, like, falling down a well and hanging on to a root that's being chewed by a rat. And there's a lion up at the top of the well, and there are poisonous snakes at the bottom of the well. And if you do nothing, the rats are going to chew through the root and make the decision for you. Sometimes we just have to, like, make a decision. And then, like I said, this is where, our evaluation, our, rational mind needs to, keep a tally. Like, the best indication of the future is, the past. So, if we're repeatedly making the same mistakes, the same choices that are leading to the same undesirable outcomes, we need to, look internally at the reasons for that, and maybe try to, get at a deeper understanding of the truth to make the better decisions that we're trying to make.
Yeah, and I think you make a great point, is that we have to either act or not act, and not acting is an action. Like, sure, it's not acting, but you're making a decision to not do anything. And for those familiar with Dante's Inferno, there's actually a special circle in hell in Dante's Inferno for the people who actually chose not to act when other people were doing bad things. So inaction lands you a place in Dante's hell. Whether you believe in Dante's hell or not, I don't even know if it was ever meant to be taken seriously. But that said, I think great comments, and thank you for making them. And Sean, why don't you go next?
We all know that confirmation bias is lead to poor decision making, harmful, sometimes maybe destructive. For example, in judicial system, right? If the jury is confirmation biased, then the trial may be wrong. Okay, innocent people may be convicted. In our political system, says election, right? I think everybody probably confirmation biased. We all vote for candidate who represent our value, our view to problems or matters. So this is okay, right? So this I don't think we can overcome this type of confirmation bias. Now the question is, if you know a candidate had an obnoxious personality, intentionally mislead voters, then that's destructive. Do we have hope, like, to solve this kind of problem? This is my question. Okay, I feel like, look, all politicians may not make empty promise. We understand, because they're hand tied by other parties. Something you want to do, you can't do it because our system. This is normal, right? But if someone intentionally mislead voters, and he doesn't care about our country, only care about his ego, So, but voters still vote for him. That's horrible, confirmation bias. Okay, to me, that's the hope to solve this problem.
Yeah, so you said a couple of things. First of all, as far as juries and confirmation bias, it's actually up to the lawyers on both sides of the trial to eliminate jury members that might have significant confirmation bias for or against either party in the trial. So that is really one of the jobs of the lawyers. Now, you also said that you can't overcome confirmation bias. We agreed with that early on. There's no overcoming it completely, but we can minimize it and we can reduce it. And that's all I'm suggesting that we make a strong effort to do, is to minimize our confirmation bias so that we can see the truth more clearly and not get stuck in bad ideas. Because when we have bad ideas, they cause us harm in our lives, and we sometimes don't even realize that those ideas are what are causing us harm, but they do. Misunderstandings cause all kinds of harm to ourselves and to others. And so seeing the truth really clearly is super important to me. In terms of someone intentionally misleading voters being horrible, I agree with you. I think that voters often have their own confirmation bias, and if someone tells them something that feeds their confirmation bias rather than helps them overcome it, then it can come into a situation where, you know, a politician can feed confirmation bias and feed on fears and get a lot of support for misleading people. And that's a very real scenario that I think politicians have probably played since ancient Greece. So I don't think it's a modern phenomenon, although I think that in the modern world, it's accentuated. That said, David, why don't you go next?
Okay, I had a couple of points I wanted to make. The first, just to clarify, confirmation bias has to be balanced with not all ideas are worth discussing or spending time on. So, you know, if you're dealing with a flat earther, well, that actually leads to my second point. If you enter a conversation hoping to change someone's mind, especially if their views are quite different from yours, I think you'll find yourself frustrated. I don't think it's realistic. What I suggest in a situation where somebody is saying something that sounds extremely dubious in your opinion, you just active listening, as you suggested actually in your presentation, active listening. But hopefully they realize you're active listening and then they take an interest in your opinion. But if they don't take an interest in your opinion, I don't give it personally. In other words, I only give my opinion if after active listening, somebody says, well, so I get the impression you might not agree with me. What do you think? Then I'm happy to give my opinion. But otherwise, it's a waste of time. And I limit my energy to those conversations that we're sort of on the same page and just discussing perhaps the fine points. That's all I have to say.
I applaud you, David. You have more restraint than me, my friend. I am aiming to get where you already are. So
you're young and you have energy. I'm too low energy to try to change people's minds unless we're fairly close.
Yeah, I'm middle-aged, my friend, but I have a lot of energy, that's for sure. So, but I still have a lot to learn, and I'm progressing. And that said, I appreciate your comments, David. I agree with everything you said, 110%, and I'm striving to do it myself. So we'll go ahead.
Thanks, Garrett. Yeah, I'm just thinking of a couple of incidences where I've changed. I don't know if it's exactly confirmation bias, but where I've changed my strong held belief in something. The first one happened very recently. That was, I'm a big fan, or I'm very curious about the possibility of extraterrestrial life being here. I'm really quite fascinated by it when you consider that it's, you know, the size of the universe with trillions of galaxies. You know, I thought, yeah, they're probably here. And then when the USS Nimitz released the footage of the Tic Tac UFOs that were traveling at Mach 20 speed and changing direction and going underwater, I was like, to me, I know it caused a little bit of hysteria in the States. Apparently it was released on 60 Minutes, and there was a degree of like, whoa, this is as close as we have got to them to it being revealed. And I was like fully on board with it. Like, you know, what more proof do you need? This technology is just beyond anything we're close to developing. They can't even explain what technology is driving these things. But then I was watching YouTube, and I know he's a big fan of this extraterrestrial topic, is the Japanese theoretical physicist Michio Kaku. And so I thought I'll just have a look at YouTube, what he says about the UFOs and the, you know, what's his latest stance on it. And he was saying that, oh, look, we've got Mach 20 we have developed Mark 20 drones. The US military developed it. And I thought, what? But he's saying, oh, they're so unreliable, they couldn't have done this. They couldn't do what these ones are doing. And I thought, hang on a minute, but they've developed Mark 20, which is 20 times the speed of sound. So it's 12,000 miles per second. Is it, or a minute? I don't know. But anyway, they've got that. So I Googled it, and the US military developed that technology. They had it in 2014, the ability they're flying drones around at Mach 20. So anyway, I don't want to go on about the UFO topic. I'm getting off track, but I instantly changed my mind. And now I'm on board that, it's quite possibly this whole thing is a storm in a teacup because it's US military technology that everybody's freaking out about. So I was pretty happy with how quickly I just changed my long-held belief. But the point is, I just needed that one bit of clear evidence and bang, I've changed my mind on something that I firmly believed previously. But I still reckon they're here, by the way. They're probably under the sea. This 75% of the Earth's covered by water. We've got no idea what's under the sea. They've probably been here all along. They're more evolved than we are. They look at us like we look at chimpanzees, but they're not from another planet. They were here all along. That's my latest theory. Thanks for my ramble.
Interesting. Thanks, Will. Yeah, I would argue, I actually have an essay on extraterrestrial life, and the 60,000 foot version of the article or the essay is, if you look at, even the visible universe and how large it is, the idea that in such a gigantic, just unfathomably large universe, that we are absolutely the only planet that has any life on it whatsoever. And you also look at how old our planet is and that it's relatively young, and that humanity as an intelligent life form is extremely young in the planet's history. Like, to think that there's no other life in the visible universe seems unfathomable. If my hypothesis on the origins of the universe is correct, it's an infinitely large universe. And so there's actually infinite opportunities for life, and therefore infinite life forms out there in the universe. So I don't know what those videos were of. I saw some videos that looked surprising where military personnel in fighter jets seemed very surprised by the stuff they were seeing. But that doesn't mean that there wasn't some DARPA project that did it. But, at the end of the day, all of that for me is outside of my control. So as a practicing Stoic, I don't worry too much about it. I focus on the day-to-day. So that said, it's intellectually interesting stuff, but doesn't impact my day-to-day decisions too much. That said, Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, my point I just wanted to make about seeking the truth. And in my business, we have another bias called availability bias, and that's the availability of information. And when I contrast when we as a group where I work, when we think about trying to get to understand, dig down, peel onions, and get to the understanding of what we're evaluating. We have a lot more information today than we did 25 years ago, before we were able to surf the net, and before the web had so much information out there, and even contrasted with 50 years ago, and those poor people 50 years ago. And hopefully 10, 20 years from now, as long as the information doesn't get distorted by bad actors on the web, I'm encouraged that hopefully we'll be able to get to have more information, more availability, less availability bias, and then be able to get to understanding what the truth is.
That is a great conversation topic. Is, will the future of humanity see a clearer version of the truth or a more distorted version of the truth? And I think that the jury's still out on that, Jeff, but it's a really interesting topic. And when you say those poor people 50 years ago, I think of my grandparents telling me before refrigerators existed, when they used to get ice blocks to keep their milk cold in their ice box. It was literally a box where they would buy ice and they would stick ice in it to keep things cold enough that it didn't rot. You know, how we've come in just a couple of generations, how far we've come in just a couple of generations. And so I'd love Ellis to add a conversation about the truth and what are the forces moving us in the direction of seeing the truth more clearly and moving us in the direction of not seeing the truth more clearly. And how do we, I think we all have hopefully an inclination to want to see the truth more clearly. How do we help support those of us that are trying to see the truth more clearly so that the truth will become more clear over time rather than being more distorted? I would argue that, it's been a long time since, like people actually believed Earth was flat. And so there are now, like I said, over 300,000 Americans that think Earth is flat again. I don't think anyone saw that for a very long time, up until, hundreds of years probably it's been since people thought Earth was flat, up until modern technology allowed us to spread misinformation so readily. So I think the truth itself, there is truly a war on truth going on right now. And part of the reason I started the Freethinker Institute is to come in on the side of truth in that war on truth. And my method of doing it is to teach people critical thinking skills and to think for themselves, because I think it's lack of thinking for ourselves that helps misinformation spread. It's lack of thinking at all, or lack of thinking for ourselves and lack of knowing how to think critically that allows misinformation to spread. So this is very near and dear to me, Jeff. So I think we should have a separate meeting on that topic alone. Thanks for bringing Katie.
Another related one for seeing the truth clearly is starting with what you want to believe about something as a distortion. It might be like, I don't know, it might be like, I haven't researched it. So it might be like, oh, there was slavery in the US. It might be like, well, I want to believe that we weren't bad. So I believe, so I find a way to rationalize it. Well, there was slavery everywhere. You know what I mean? I find like I start with the belief and then I start searching from the belief that I want to believe. Well, it wasn't that bad, or those people did that too, or, that's another one.
Yeah, I do think starting from what we want to believe is a form of confirmation bias. It's right. Like we want to believe it because we have some sense that is truth. And so we want to look for things that confirm our current preconceived notions. In the case of slavery, I mean, slavery has existed for a very long time. It's only been in the last, couple hundred years that we finally came to a more or less consensus. But I read somewhere that there are actually more slaves right now than there were at any other point in history. I don't know if that's true. I didn't fact check it. If anyone wants to, we can fact check that. So even though slavery is more or less universally admonished, there's still an unfortunately large number of slaves, which says that we're not doing such a good job of enforcing morality. And here we have lots of people saying there's no such thing as morality in the philosophy community, that morality is just this weird concept that doesn't even exist. And so, that said, it's a complicated subject, and I want to let Jose go because he had really interesting things to say last time, and it's his turn.
Thank you. A lot of interesting comments here from the people who were speaking. So I just want to add a couple of things. First, Garrett, you mentioned the war on truth. I have this little principle that says sometimes when you want to explain some behavior or actions, just follow the money.
Yeah.
And I wonder, right, if you think about it, who would be the most interested in the war on truth? The ones that are closer to the truth or the ones that are farther away from it? Just think about it. The other point, Jeff was mentioning the availability bias. Maybe I'm incorrect here, but the availability bias is not availability of information, is that you rely, and that's why it is called a bias, is because myself rely on the readily available information. So the fact that we have a lot of information these days compared to 40 years ago when I was going to school, it's not an availability bias. It's just the fact that there's more availability. The question is, can you rely on it in the same way your parents or my parents rely on the information before? I don't know. So I just wanted to clarify. I think availability bias is that it's not the availability per se, is the fact that you pick on the most readily available information to form a judgment. The other point I wanted to make is what Will was talking about, the extraterrestrial. 2 comments about that. I think it's important to understand what the question is. If somebody were to ask me, do you believe in extraterrestrial life? I'm with Garrett here. I said the universe is very large. Who knows? But I suspect that there's life somewhere else, right? However, if somebody tells me, do you believe there is extraterrestrial life on Earth? Different question, right? And that one, I will have more doubts than on the first one because I haven't seen convincing information. But going to convincing information, remember, our minds are a 3-gear car. It's not a 2-gear car. It's not that our minds rejects or accepts. Remember, there's a 3rd gear that is called suspend. So the fact that I believe in A before extraterrestrial, there are no extraterrestrial life on Earth, and all of a sudden I have an information that says there is, I don't need to switch from accept to reject or from reject to accept. There's an intermediate point that says suspend judgment until you have additional information to reverse your prior belief. And finally, a point that I wanted to make about what David was talking about, that in fact, it is a little waste of time to convince others that are not prepared to listen to reasons. And most of them are obviously the ones that are on the other side, that they don't have enough reasons to believe what they believe. I found 2 or 3 interesting observations. I was really concerned about that when in some meetings we were, a friend of mine and myself, who were dealing with people like that. And we said, we ask ourselves, where does our responsibility lie? When you are in a group of 10 people, 15 people, and someone is clearly dispensing wrong information. So we had that discussion with my friend. I said, well, he said, well, it's a waste of time, right? And it's true. Sometimes it's a waste of time. But I was not on the waste of time. I said, do I have a responsibility? If we have one person there that is just dispensing misinformation right and left, what's our responsibility? Anyway, we didn't take any action at that moment. We continued the debate later. But that's a question I always wonder, right? Because it's definitely difficult. But I mean, not everything that we're responsible for is easy. And the other thing also I learned from reading a lot of scholarly articles, because I was really surprised with the amount of misinformation in the US. I mean, many years ago, I'm from Canada, by the way. And I was saying, why is people not reacting to this misinformation? And all the articles I read, they talk about that. I think Katie was the one who said, I mean, we believe it because we want to believe it. It's psychological. So we're not prepared to debate it because we want to believe it. And to me, that has been the more satisfactory explanation of why critical thinking crumbles when you're facing people that have a belief not supported by many facts. That's all.
Thank you. That was a lot and very good stuff. I think you're honing in on an important point, Jose, which is like, do we have an obligation to combat misinformation? And you know, I manage sometimes some anonymous chat rooms, and I had someone in one of my anonymous chat rooms who was, you know, had some unsavory beliefs, let's put it that way. And instead of just kicking them out, I tried to converse with them and understand why did they come to those beliefs using the Daryl Davis method. And people got very mad at me for not just kicking them out for having these unsavory beliefs. And I really think that we, you know, if we don't combat this misinformation and argue that people should not hold unsavory beliefs, then what we do is we push those unsavory belief people into echo chambers where they spread those unsavory beliefs and they recruit other people into them. And then suddenly those unsavory beliefs spread and become, the norm. And they start to vote into power politicians that have the same unsavory beliefs as them. And so I do think we all have an obligation to combat misinformation and to join truth in terms of the war on truth, because while I think the truth is eternal and it'll outlive all of us, during our lives, I want to see the truth reign, and I want to see the truth be spread and be shared and help people prosper, because I think people prosper from the truth rather than from misinformation. I think misinformation is what causes the most amount of harm. And that's why I said confirmation bias, which I would argue is one of the key things that enables misinformation to remain and spread, is enemy number one in society. So that said, I do think we all have an obligation to stand up for what we believe is the truth, but we also have to have the humility to understand that what we believe is the truth may be our own confirmation bias, and we should be open to other truths as well. And, we really need to hone our critical thinking skills so that we can learn to rely on them and know which one's the real truth versus which one's the fake truth, because that's what's going to help us guide ourselves and other people in the right direction. And that's what this community is all about, is helping each other, guide ourselves in the right directions and guide each other in the right direction. So that said, Ellis, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, I was about to say it's after 8:30. So if anyone hasn't spoken yet and they'd like to, please put up your hands now. And I'll just let you know our next upcoming events. So on the 31st, we have our speaker, Remco Van Santen from Australia. Will be covering the topic Ludwig Wittgenstein, Language and Our Connection with the World. And on February 7th, we'll be discussing intuition versus reason. And for anyone interested, I posted a membership document. If you'd like to be a member of the Freethinker, they meet on the weekends. And also, I have put the links for our Discord community and our short survey.
And the intuition versus reason, by the way, is about when should we rely on our intuition versus when should we rely on reason. And I think it should be very interesting. And I'm looking forward to Remco's presentation on Wittgenstein as well. And Valentine's Day and love are near and dear to me. The fifth intention is an eagerness to give and receive love. So, love is even part of the core values of the community. So, and that includes platonic as well as romantic love. That said, let's let Ben go.
Yeah. Okay. Two kind of points I guess I wanted to make was just, it takes a lot of effort to combat confirmation bias. Like you were mentioning, the benefits of it is that certainty, and it allows you to make those easy decisions. So, like you said, some things are worth debating, some things are not worth debating. Yeah, I don't think flat Earth is worth debating. But even determining what things are worth debating is challenging. The vaccine is a very hot topic. I have a number of friends that believe in it and a number of friends that don't, and I'll just kind of leave it at that. I just wanted to also mention, when we're looking at slavery, I'm not sure about fact checking on the aggregate number of slaves globally, but one thing that needs to be kind of considered when we're looking at that and social realities is something called the New Jim Crow, which is basically looking at the prison population in the States, the racial makeup of that population, and the work that they're expected to do for next to nothing, which is basically tantamount to slave wages. So slavery takes many forms. And so just because it may have been abolished in one form or it may not be as prevalent in that form. You have to look at the other ways in which it may exist to really look at the greater reality of the social situation.
Yeah, I agree with you completely, and I think great point. Thank you for making them. And we did have a topic on vaccines, by the way, which I think we're gonna have our YouTube videos, our videos posted on YouTube for past events. I have a collaborator that is going to help us get them up on YouTube. So if you want to see that, keep an eye out on our YouTube channel, and hopefully it'll come out before too long. That said, I want to let Will go next.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I'll keep it very brief because Ben said pretty much exactly what I was going to say. I was thinking about slavery, Garrett, when you mentioned the topic, and how many people are in effect slaves, because slave masters in the 18th and 19th century, they kind of paid their slaves in food and lodging, if you could call that a form of payment. Well, that's all people are getting today, to work in the most mundane, boring, heartbreaking drudgery for life, just so they can pay the rent and get food on the table, and that's their life. So they might as well be slaves. I think it's an interesting topic, and it's part of the capitalist model. It's like, if you can't make the grade, if you can't get university education or a trade, you're stuck on the assembly line. Good luck. So yeah, it's interesting. It's a modern slavery everywhere.
Yeah, I did Google it real quick, and it actually turns out that 20 million are in forced labor and 22 million are trapped in forced marriage. So they're in, a quote unquote marriage where they're essentially a slave, probably, I'm assuming, the wife to the husband. Although I guess theoretically I shouldn't be sexist and assume that, but that's my guess, is that's the majority of those 22 million. And, interesting. And I don't know if that's the largest number that existed historically, but we do have a much higher population than existed historically. So probably the per capita number of slaves is probably way down, but the absolute number might be way up. And that's where, depending on how you paint the numbers, it can tell a different story. So that said, the other thing I did forget to comment on Ben's comment about how it takes a lot of effort to combat confirmation bias. It absolutely does. I don't want to diminish that point, but I would argue that it's an effort well worth it, because combating our own confirmation bias and helping others combat their confirmation bias does increase happiness and decrease harm in the world, like actual happiness and actual harm. And so it's hard, but it's worth fighting for. And I have a saying, which is that nothing worth fighting for is easy, right? Most of the things that are valuable enough to fight for are difficult, but they're worth it because you're fighting for something valuable and important. So, put in that time and effort, listen to the people who have the misunderstandings or what you see as a misunderstanding, and listen to them with an open mind and see if they maybe have a better reason for thinking what they do. And if not, ask them thoughtful questions that will lead them to realize the error of their ways. And even though it does take a lot of, cognitive energy, it's really worth it, because it does make the world a better place. And shouldn't each one of us do what we can to make the world a better place? So that said, I want to let Olga go.
Hi. Thank you. Yes, but I could comment on anything what was said, and I actually maybe agree with everyone at some point. But, I could say, for example, that yes, of course, we should not discuss how if Earth is flat, but we have, for example, absolutely mathematical statement that universe probably is flat, and you probably heard it. Yes, so we don't know what these people actually hearing and what kind of conclusion they're making. You see, so mathematically universe could be flat, but mathematically, you see, and so if we have, for example, simulation theory, when they say it's simulation hypothesis. You could read it about it on Wikipedia, for example. And then all information then in our 3D world could be written on two-dimensional sphere and projected inside. So it's also kind of hypothesis that discussed by scientists. So you see, we have a lot of these abstract theories that could not, some people could not even comprehend. But I actually would like to say something about also slavery. I live in New York, and I saw at night Hispanic young guy on bicycle who is definitely delivering food, stood near closed church and prayed. So it was obvious that he is praying that his life become a little bit better. So yes, there is modification of slavery. And right now, when I see these people on bicycles who delivering food in rain and snow and everything, so they have so much pressure with this Instacart, and they have to press the button before others press the button. And we don't even need to think where they live, what they eat, and if they have shelter. You see, long ago, slaves should have shelter, and people paid for them, and they value them. Now we don't value them, these people on bicycles. So you see, it's our society is so modified that we cannot really define everything as it was defined 200 years ago. So probably we have redefined everything. Probably we have to say it's what called truth 200 years ago. So now it's something different. So I'm not sure how to, and I could, if I have a couple of minutes, I could say something from my personal experience. Or is it possible?
Yeah, go ahead, Olga.
Okay, that's I have really serious crisis in the middle of 2021, because I read news, mostly BBC. I consider it's less biased source for some reason. But they also have everything, but still. And suddenly I have New Yorker. It's July 26. And on page, I think 52 or 32, they have an article, the Kentler experiment. Do you know about Kentler experiment? Kentler, Kentler experiment. Did you hear about it?
I'm not familiar with it.
No one. Please read this article. It's July 26, 2021 in New Yorker. And there was article about Kentler experiment in Germany. It was like 50 years ago when, not 50, maybe 30, 20 years ago, when foster care children were distributed between pedophiles. Could you believe it? I would not, when I started to read it, I could not understand what it's about. And I could not even read it, the whole article, you see, but it's the fact. And now, of course, before that, I heard about QAnon and everything. And of course, if someone told me something like this before, I would dismiss it as conspiracy theory. But now I have to believe it. And I still cannot wrap my mind around it. And then I could not read the whole article. You probably should. And then I started to search online, and I found out about NAMBLA. I didn't know that it's could. I'm not. I live here for a long time, but I did not know about NAMBLA. I'm not American. It's something like North American boy adults love society, something like this. I'm not sure how to. And it stopped to. It only was closed in 2016. And of course, there is some kind of, some people make connection. 2016, it's Trump was elected. So they probably connected it to Trump. Probably it's that it was he was elected. It was coincidence. I could not even imagine that such organization could exist anywhere on earth. You see, so right now I'm in so, I still could not wrap my mind around of all this. And then I read that something in Great Britain, there was some kind of TV personality also in something. And there is, it's all you could read online. And I kind of still, and if we start to think that it was, okay, now everything good, now there is nothing like this happen, it stopped to happen, it would be naive. So something still probably somewhere, something is happening. We just don't know about it. And I never saw or talked to person, I'm saying not online, in real life from QAnon. I don't know what it is, but probably these people try to reveal something like this and someone trying to ridicule them. So I am not sure what is going on, but please read this article. And maybe I come to the next year meeting. Please tell me, what do you think about it? Because it's something that I could not even imagine and would definitely dismiss as conspiracy theory. But now I have to believe in it because it's fact.
Yeah, I agree with you, Olga. It's a very disturbing thing. I Googled it. About your comment on simulation theory, I posted my essay on objective reality in the online community, and I think in the chat. I'm not sure if I put it in the chat, but it's definitely in the online community in Discord. And basically, if I'm right, whether the universe that we see is a simulation or not, the winning strategy is to treat it as if it's reality, which makes the whole simulation hypothesis completely irrelevant. Whether we live in a simulation or not, it doesn't matter, because we might as well treat it as reality either way. And the other thing to mention is that sorry. So the other thing is about people having so much pressure to make money. I agree that's a very big deal. There are so many people under pressure to make money, and like immense amounts of pressure. And that's why one of the goals of the Free Thinker Institute is to help everybody on Earth, quite frankly, although this won't happen in my lifetime, but help everybody on Earth make enough money that more money won't make them happier, which according to studies in modern USD dollars is about 100,000 USD in purchasing power parity. I teach a product management boot camp, which is what I've done in my career, which can help people make $100,000 coming out of the boot camp into product management roles, which are highly needed. There aren't enough product managers in the country. And so that is near and dear to me as a goal. And right now, socioeconomic disparity is widening. So you have the very wealthiest of the wealthy getting wealthier and wealthier, and then stagnation in all of the poorer socioeconomic strata. So it right now is not headed in a direction where everybody will make that kind of money, even when the Earth becomes so prosperous that it would be possible. Right now, it's not even possible. But that said, that's probably a conversation for another night. And I want to let Stephen go. So hi, Stephen, good to see you. I've seen you before.
Thank you.
Thank
yes,
you.
thank you. I want to thank you. And I was late to joining the conversation. I just wanted to, I have a great interest in what is a toolkit? When you meet someone, especially if they are at least somewhat open to a discussion about if they have an assertion or you come across a fact or you come across a research, some research and it challenges your opinions. How do you analyze it? So what's the toolkit? And you've touched on Socratic reasoning, questioning, defining your terms. Again, Socratic, it's not as well taught as it was. I know I made a joke with some college friends that the three most common words in a college dorm were either define your terms or let's go drinking. So it's, but there are, the ideal would be to have some sort of like game that people could play to, how do we, we've just heard something, we heard some news or, and something on the internet popped up and it intrigues me because it confirms my cognitive bias or my pre-existing opinion. But how do I challenge that? How do I investigate that? What's the toolkit of how you question anything that comes across your radar, across your screen? And maybe, when people get together, make it some sort of game for people to learn and to share. That's it. The other thing on morality is, I think one of the most powerful tools is the old the golden rule, which is basically would I if this was done to me, would I consider that acceptable? And it comes in many forms. The law of karma is one variation. The law of the old expression, be nice to people as when you're on your way up, because you'll meet them again on your way down. All of these are concepts which allow you to analyze whether something is good or not good. Whereas the idea of the good for the greatest number, which is very common. The problem with that is good for who? And again, you get into the money question. Who profits from something? Because just saying the greatest good for the greatest number or utilitarianism doesn't tell you if you yourself want to be the one who's the victor, who's the one sacrificing. And a modern example is the Tesla, Mr. Musk thinks it's wonderful to have these machines, these quote self-driving cars, which aren't really self-driving, they're more assisted. That you've got like a robot co-pilot, but it's not self-driving. But the more data you get, then the better the car, the device will be, and theoretically, more people will survive. And if all of the cars were all robot driven, everything would be wonderful and we'd be in a world with no car accidents. Meanwhile, people are having car accidents in Teslas, crashing into the back of police cars and all kinds of things you could read about. That would be resolved if you said, would I like to be the one who crashes into another car because my self-driving car, I just trust the self-driving car. I wouldn't like to be the one that gets crushed in a car because I just want to provide more data for some future wonderful paradise where these things work better. So I think the golden rule is so common, exists in all traditions. It's a powerful tool. It's very much like natural law, which is what many philosophers have discussed and consider that. Thank you.
Thanks. So the tool that I'm trying to add to the toolkit, you mentioned the toolkit, is listening to understand, which is listening to other people's perspectives and asking thoughtful questions with Socratic method, but not as sharp of a Socratic method as Socrates had, but more of a soft Socratic method of asking questions that make someone introspect about why they think what they do, and force them to question themselves, their own rationale for believing or having come to the beliefs that they have. And that's what I think changes minds, is getting someone to think carefully about why they came to their existing beliefs and how they can defend their existing beliefs without making them defensive. And it is an art. It's not easy. It does take effort, as was talked about, but I think it's a well worthwhile effort to convince people to be more aligned with truth and to make better decisions. That's making the world a better place. It's making their lives better. If they influence you, it's making your life better. It helps everybody. As far as the golden rule, I like the golden rule, but I actually like the platinum rule better. And I have a little iteration on the platinum rule to make it a little more fail-safe. The platinum rule is do unto others as others would have you do unto them. And what I would argue is you have to add, as long as you would agree, right? If someone wants me to be their slave, I'm not going to say, oh, you want me to be your slave, all right, I'll be your slave. I have to agree to it too. But as long as I agree to it, I want to treat people the way they want to be treated, because not everybody wants to be treated like me. If you take the example of a masochist, right? They might think I want to be hurt, so therefore I should hurt other people. Well, they're following the golden rule, but hurting other people is not really the right way to go about society, because not everybody's a masochist. Whereas, if you treat people the way they want to be treated, you're kind of always in good shape there, because that's how someone wants to be treated in the first place. And as long as you agree to it, why not, right? So that said, I'm going to let David go, but then I want to wind down because we're at a little bit after 9 o'clock, 5 after 9, and I've been up since very early this morning. So David, please go ahead.
Yes, my question is just about you, Garrett, is joining future Zoom sessions. Do we still use the same Freethinker link that we were sent, or is there a different link for each session?
So anyone that wants to be on the mailing list, I hope that you will get an email with a survey and instructions on how to get on the mailing list. And if you get on the mailing list, you'll have a calendar invite with the link to join this session every Tuesday evening, which I would be honored if you guys want to be on the mailing list. I should have mentioned that earlier. Hopefully Ellis will be able to send out an email that has those instructions. And if you don't get them, then write me, either on Meetup or in the online community, and I can, I just need your email address and I can add you to the mailing list. We do have the same link every week to join the sessions, and we have a Freethinker Institute meetup in New York City, which is our kind of our home base, if you will, although a lot of the meetups that we advertise to are much larger than that one. That's kind of our central meetup, our home meetup group, although we have a couple of Freethinker Institute meetups around the world as well. I think we have one in Toronto and one in Bangkok. So, but I'll look forward to seeing you again. It sounds like you'll come back, David, which we appreciate. You had great comments. And I do want to thank everybody. We had so many good comments tonight, just like tons of wisdom and knowledge shared. So I want to thank you all for contributing that to the community. And I would love for you all to join the online community. And we're having really good conversations there as well. So would love to interact with you all there. So thank you all for coming. Hope you all have a great rest of your night, and hope to see you all again. Lots of regulars, which is great to see all your faces. And thanks again for coming. Hope everybody has a great night, and hope to see you all next Tuesday and in the online community between now and then. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you, Garrett. Good night.
Bye-bye.